All right, so let's just look at what we've done up to now. We have looked at, well, after rather not last week, we've looked at nominalism, realism. We've looked at, well, there's the videos we haven't gone through. And remember, amongst the recordings that the presentations you've given us, last week we had Occam and something on Aristotle and on Plato. We haven't really talked about that yet. So let me just get back to that. And again, that was great work. Thank you very much to all of those. Occam, well, scratching the surface, So you've now heard, sorry, not Occam, Heraclitus. And I confuse Occam and Heraclitus, and you'll see in a moment, for what reasons. Heraclitus, if you know nothing of Heraclitus, you got to know that he made that statement that you cannot step into the same river twice. And you know that if you remember that statement, a lot of what he says will, if you have to think about it, will fall into place. Firstly, of course, it's a strange notion to say that you cannot step into the same river twice, because, well, that's what we do all the time. When I've stepped into the Vaal River, not once or twice, but hundreds of times. And every time I called it the Vaal River. And I'm sure you've done the same. So why can't you say you step into, or why can't you step into the same river twice? And of course, you would have seen from the presentation, because by the time you step into that river again, a week later, a day later, an hour, a minute later, the water that was there when you first stepped in has gone. And so it's, if you like, it's not the same water you're stepping in, and it's not the same river that you're stepping in. And you will see, of course, all of that has to be, in a sense, is linked to the question that we are raising with regards to Aristotle's four causes. Because if you say you can't step into the river twice, then it's like, well, I mean, what can't you step in? You step into the water again, but it's not the same water, because it's the water that has flown past. And so if you're saying that the river is really just the water that's flowing through, then if that's your definition, no, you can't step into the same water again, because the water has flown away. And so it alerts us to the fact that our understanding of river is more than just the water, because yes, we do step into the same river twice and many times. And our understanding of the river is more than just it being the water that's flowing through. And of course, Heraclitus would have been aware of, he would have stepped into whichever river flows through Ephesus. He would have stepped into it many times and still called it Ephesus. And when he's talking to other people and not philosophizing, he's still saying that it is that same river. So, in fact, one of his students, his name just escaped me, Cratylus, I think, Cratylus. He said you can't even step into the same river once, because when your toe touches the water first, by the time your heel is in the water, it's already gone. So you can't even step into it once. So what we're seeing there is, and that's why it's important in the course of history of economic thought and or philosophy of science generally, it is that we are using concepts and terms or using, that the questioning that we're looking at, what is it really, those universal terms and concepts, and we're using them because our knowledge of things hangs on those universal terms that are there for forever, if you like. So if we talk about the river, let's say the Limpopo River, Heraclitus would be saying, well, the water is going through. You can't step into the into that same river twice. But we talk about the Limpopo River, and we talk about the Limpopo River now, and in 50 years from now or 1,000 years from now, we still know what we're talking about, because our knowledge has to do with things that are in a sense permanent, not changeable and always moving, as Heraclitus is making us aware of. So Heraclitus is making us aware of an aspect of the real world, and he's, if you like, jarring our mind, because one aspect of that real world is that it is forever changing, and yet we are using terms and concepts that seem to have a permanent meaning. So what is that relationship between those permanent concepts and words and the forever changing worlds? And that is really what theory as a whole does. It's trying to sort of nail down that which is changing forever. And there are many aspects to it. And amongst the Greek philosopher, Heraclitus would have been one that emphasized the changing nature of things. And then others like Parmenides and Plato were sort of trying to nail down these sort of more permanent aspects of knowledge and our knowing. And so that's Heraclitus. And of course, in a sense, that notion that Heraclitus is giving us about the river that's forever changing makes us think of nominalism, doesn't it? Because nominalism says that only the individual things are real. The universals aren't real. And, that was beautifully presented by one of the presentations today. I think it was the one on Occam. Occam is saying only individuals exist. Universals do not exist. They are really originate in our mind. And yet when we talk about a river Limpopo, well, yes, the waters may be changing all the time, but it is still there. As a river, it is still there, even if the waters change. But we've got an individual river that we are naming. Okay, so that is the Limpopo. That doesn't yet tell us, if you are being asked what is a river, well, in the terms of the four courses, you would have an idea how to get at that and how to, if you like, define and give the four courses of a river. But Heraclitus's focus obviously has been on the changing water that's going through all the time. And since water, again, when you look at water, what is water? It's easy to point out water. We can give it that we can say it's H2O2, but obviously the water that's in the river Limpopo is more than just not H2O2, it's H2O. Why do I say H2O2? Because there are some people who say that if you want to avoid the coronavirus, or even if you contract it and you want to spill it out of your body, if you like, you've got to nebulize with H2O2. All right, so that's not quite water. But the water is forever changing, and the water that you're stepping into now is different from the water that was before. But despite that, so if you focus only on the individual, then you have stepped into a different mass of water, different drops of water, and if you focus on the individual only, it's as if you're saying there really is not one river, but the river is changing all the time. So you can see how, in a sense, that is connected to nominalist thinking. And so when we thinking in nominalist terms, then we are also thinking forever in changing terms, capturing individuals. And the water that's flown through is no longer the water that was there before. And so things have changed. So what do we do about theory, trying to get to grips with all of that? We then had a presentation on Aristotle. Thank you very much. That was very neat as well. And of course, that made reference to the four courses. But before Aristotle came Plato. Plato was the teacher of Aristotle. And Plato was also the student, but Plato was the student of Cratylus. I get that name wrong all the time, who was in turn the student of Heraclitus. So there's a connection from Heraclitus to Plato. And Plato was thinking, well, this really is extreme to say that the river is changing all the time. And he tried to focus on that which is more permanent about the river. And the individual bit of water that's flowing through is changing all the time, but there's something permanent about the river, and that's why we're able to use the word the river as we're able to use the word individual, economy, society, even though it's made up of individuals that are alive today and gone tomorrow. And so perhaps Plato overreached in the sense that he introduced a form of extreme realism, where he was saying that these things that exist, that the words that we are using, they have a form. And remind me later when we talk about the formal courses of the four courses of Aristotle, we look at the formal course. And that relates in a sense to the term form that Plato was using. In the presentation on Plato, you would have seen that we were told that there's this world of the forms out there, and that the world that we're living in a sense, is only a shadow of or a bad imitation of that more real world, if you like, where these forms exist. And we ended off saying that, well, what Plato does, he says that because we know in the manner of having these forms about those words that give us a form, because we know like that, because that's what our knowledge is like. Our knowledge is about the river Limpopo in general, not about the individual bit of water that's going through, because our knowledge is about something general, about universals, like the river. So Plato said that we ought to know in the way that things are, and because we know in these universal forms, therefore the world must be, what exists must be in terms of the way we know it, must be in terms of those universals that exist. And therefore he postulated that there's this world of forms, of which the world here is just a bad copy. I mean, I'm just talking, and that's terrible. So you have any questions on your side, please raise your hand. Or if you want me to move on to a different direction before getting sidetracked, please do raise your hand. So I'm going to give you a breather to raise your hand. I'm just going to get some water, and then I'll hope there's some raised hands. Otherwise, I'm going to continue. Okay, no raised hands. All right. We're not studying philosophy, okay? So don't break your head about wanting to get to grips with this and delving too deeply into it. Just scratch the surface. But all right, given that we're not studying philosophy, why should you be interested in this at all? You should be interested in this because if you look at our modern economics, but also other social sciences, even psychology, you know, my niece did a degree in master's degree. She's doing a PhD degree in psychology. And what, you know, what for does it take? It's got to take on a quantitative work. And so we've got this obsession with quantitative aspects. See, give me, there is like my side. Okay, my network is posing poor quality. Okay, I hope you can hear me. If you got a problem hearing me or seeing me, then let me know. So what we have in economics, we've got a bit of an obsession about data. And I just want to, in a sense, trace that obsession because it's got to do with our modern answer to the question that Plato was answering. Plato, and it's not a question they posed themselves obviously and explicitly, but it is a question that they seem to be answering implicitly, and the same with us. We seem to be answering a question in our theory, but it's a question that we're not thinking about explicitly or even consciously, but just the way we proceed in our theories, in our analysis, in our economics, sociology, and other subjects. And that question is a theoretical question, which I try to illustrate in the example of Plato. Does the way we know have to be, does the way we know the world have to be that the world is? And we know when we look around, we see that the world is made up of individual things. As Occam says, all that exists are individual things you can feel, touch, smell. There are no general things. And so whereas Plato looks at his knowledge, and he knows his knowledge is in the manner of forms. He's got some knowledge about justice, about friendship, about beauty. And therefore, these things must exist in reality. Once we adopt a nominalist position along with Occam, all right, and that was great stuff on Occam. We'll get to Occam in a moment. So if we adopt a nominalist position and insist that the only things that exist are the individual things, then we are also, and if our answer to the question that we are sort of answering implicitly, again, let me remind you, the question is, does the way we know the world have to be the same as how the world is made? If we're now answering that question saying yes, and we insist that the world is only made up of individual things, then the way we know has to be knowledge about individual things. But individual things in that nominalist view do not have anything in common. They're just individuals. And the most so you cannot talk about their natures, their essences, what is universal to them. And you can only talk about the individual things. But the individual things, how do we talk about them? We talk about them in the form of statistics. 7,000 people like to eat cold ice cream out of a sample of 100,000, whatever. Okay, you are now talking about individuals without having to say that the majority of people do not like cold ice cream because only 7,000. No, Okay, that's nonsense anyway. So we are talking about, we've got this concern and this just about, well, this concern for statistics, because we with a nominalistic worldview, we're really saying only individual things exist, and the way we know would have to be in the way that, or correspond to the way that the world really is. And both the nominalist Occam and Plato would give the same answer, because both of them are looking for a correspondence. So we are, in a sense, answering that question in the same way that Plato does, even though the result is the opposite, because we're starting on the opposite side. Let me just pause there for a moment to find out if you've got any questions on that. And there don't seem to be. So we are talking about this nominalism and realism, about the forms, about Heraclitus and so on, because it puts us into a position to see how economics and other social sciences have been growing and moving in a certain direction, where our concern moves more and more the direction of becoming sophisticated in the handling of individuals, singulars, all right, the individual things which exist. And so our tools of analysis become ever more important. And well, we make them ever more important because we're looking for ways to handle the individual things rather than trying to handle the universal terms and understanding. Aristotle, for instance, would have drawn a very important distinction between the subject matter, let's say there's a subject matter called economics, and the tools which we use to investigate that subject matter. And what we're seeing, what we are seeing now is that a lot of the focus of economic analysis is dedicated towards the understanding of the tools and comprehending the tools with which we supposedly investigate the subject matter. So let me just throw in a question there, trying to make sure some people are there. What would be an example of the tools of economics?
Models and assumptions. Your microphone is muted.
Thank you. Yes, models and assumptions, they go together, of course. Often our models are just an elaboration of the assumptions. Give me examples of other tools.
Do technological softwares like Stata count as well?
Absolutely, absolutely. They're part of that. That's allowing us to handle the statistics. Other examples?
GDP and GDP per capita.
Okay, so we are doing, we are collecting statistics, data on gross domestic product. Nowadays, we are saying we cannot simply implement policy without having all the data available. And again, so we because we want to be guided by that data, we don't simply want to look at the nature of things, how things are made up, and then well, often we do because we've got our prejudices, right? No matter what the data says, we've made up our minds, and then we just try and squeeze the data that we see into our model. But certainly if you're a politician and you are proceeding with implementing a policy, you are expected to have looked at the data, okay? Because otherwise you would be held accountable. You're not informed and you're not being scientific. Other examples of the tools of economics or of any other social science. Well, here's an obvious one, and maybe you didn't say it because the first one was about models and assumptions. You know, models in a sense are a portion that form part of theories. So theories, models, data, statistics, programs that handle our statistics, the collection of statistics, these are all the tools of economics. And you would have realized that much of what you are doing in your studies is what?
Would it be research?
So that word research is a very interesting word because research wants to do what? Research does what?
I guess collecting data. I was just wondering if, you know, research would also be a tool, or does that follow from
It's
that component of the data and so on?
Yeah, very good question. I mean, the way I would see it, it's like the interface between the tools and the subject matter. So we're using research to get at the subject matter. So we're using research, and in the research, we are, let me switch off that phone, we are employing those tools, okay? Those tools, which are now your statistics, your statistical package, your model. What do you call it? When you've got to write a dissertation, honors or master's dissertation, you've got to submit the proposal, and you know at the beginning, the front part of your proposal has to be a what?
Theory.
Say.
A
Has
theory.
to be.
A hypothesis.
Thank you. A hypothesis. Okay. And then you've got to proceed and well, you can't verify the hypothesis, as I say, you could at most falsify it. But so we've got a hypothesis. Now, the very expression hypothesis is an indication that we are on nominalist ground, because a hypothesis is saying that we've got all of this data, we've collected all of that data, and we want to say something about the subject matter, if you like, the economy, whatever it is. And you are saying it on the basis of not the nature of the thing that you're investigating, but you are saying it on the basis of the data that you've collected. And so what you're doing, you're providing hypotheses, and then you evaluate the data to see if the hypothesis is borne out in the data that you have. So the hypothesis is indicative that we are not looking really, we're not talking in Aristotelian terms about the nature of things. All right, although, and we may see that later, very often we do that. All right, so I've now just given you my own hypothesis, namely it is useful it's useful to think about issues in terms of nominalism and realism, because it is allowing us to see the development of the history of thought in a certain way. All right. So I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to get data on that. But so we then looked at Aristotle and the four causes. And I think in the presentation there, the presentation was very nice. Of course, we had the four causes, essences. I mean, there's so much that could be said about Aristotle. You know, somebody said that it was as if 2,300 years ago, the world was so backwards and God decided, let's give humanity a bit of a push. And he sent down Aristotle to move us forward. So again, we're not here to study Aristotle per se, but we're taking what is interesting from Aristotle, we're scratching the surface. And again, my hypothesis being that, you know, it might just be useful. So if I look at the four courses and the videos that you've put up on this, great stuff. Thank you very much. Time to look at all of them. You know, I hope that you've been looking at each other's work. I really enjoy that. I've looked at 9. You know, I took it from the first, second, third, fourth, and so forth. So I'm not halfway through. You know, I'm 1/3 through, and my mind is spinning because obviously every single one I would want to engage and discuss it, because you can see it's opening a lot of doors towards this. Towards this, it is not, you know, to entertain you on that, or for you again to study a philosophy per se, but it might prove very useful if you let us say I'm gonna well, in the past, like, my exams have always been sit-down exams, and the exams all 3 hours. Obviously this year it's going to be different, but let us say I'm going to give a question on mercantilism, and it is, let us say, it's called you know, the sort of stuff that they also ask us at school, define and characterize. And you know, most of the time when a teacher says define and characterize, they don't even know what they want to get exactly. But because, you know, we don't even understand the word define properly. You know, anybody uses the word define, you can ask him to define your word define, and it will prove to be very difficult. Anybody able to define the word offhand? Any volunteers? It's difficult, huh?
Sorry, could you repeat that? You broke up my side. Anyone who's
Okay. Okay. Well, I'm not sure at what point I broke up, but I was asking, can anybody define the word definition?
The line is breaking up very badly.
Yeah,
Is it okay,
when you were saying define the word, and then I didn't hear the word.
Okay. I'm switching off the camera for a while. Maybe that's going to ease the problem. Define the word definition. So I'm posing a rhetorical question. You know, I wouldn't be able to define it, give it to you offhand. It would inquire a lot of, let's call it research, work, investigation, thinking about it, in order to get at the definition of definition. But one way to tackle it would be to adopt Aristotle's approach of the four causes. And so back to that question, if I were to give an exam question that starts off, or that really is define and characterize mercantilism, then you know what you should do? the first thing you should do, you should think in terms of the four causes. What is mercantilism? Who, how, the efficient cause, the final cause, the material cause, and the formal cause. And that will be your entry into any question. You could, not just when you answering an academic question like that, define and characterize mercantilism, then you got to start up with a summary of the rest of your argument. And what follows after that summary is an elaboration really of what you've given in that summary. And so to summarize a topic, a field, will be an easy way, a good way of doing that is in terms of Aristotle's four causes. So if we, and later we'll be looking at the mercantilism. So, in terms of the formal cause, what is mercantilism? It's a set of theories or set of policies. That's the formal cause. The efficient cause, who was responsible for it, who made it. Again, as we'll see, you may have done some reading already, but as you will see, it's statements propounded by merchants, let's say, just a shorthand. And so that's our efficient cause. The final cause is, what was their purpose? And, to a large degree, they were trying to help to the degree that they were advisors to the sovereign, to the king, to the statesmen. They were trying to help maximize their wealth. And then what is the material cause? Well, they were written down not in texts, they weren't economists the way we talk about today as they being economists. They were written down, pamphlets, books for the general public. They weren't academic in any way. But here, just there's a quick answer to that question: what is mercantilism? Characterize or define mercantilism, and I've done it with the tool of Aristotle's four causes. You could do the same for, let's take something like, how would Marx define capitalism? Well, he would, the formal cause probably would be a system of accumulation. And of course, a libertarian would disagree with that, but he would probably define it as a system of accumulation and for the enrichment of the capitalists. And then, so that would be moving from the final cause to the final cause, formal cause. And it's really implemented. The efficient cause is the efficient cause would be what? I mean, I'm just talking. What would be a possible efficient cause of capitalism? Any hands that can be raised? Yes, Christopher?
Maybe capitalists or the bourgeoisie.
Yeah, you had your video on capitalism. That must have put it into my mind. Okay, maybe not the bourgeoisie as those who uphold the system, the organs of state, right? And Marx would be saying, well, all of those organs of state, including education, in other words, including what you're going through now, are just part of the superstructure that is keeping all of that in place. And so we would have the efficient cause, and then the material cause could be, what would be the material cause? Any volunteers? Well, it's probably in the form. It's probably in the form of the laws, written contracts, ownership contracts. I mean, ownership would play a big role. So what you'd have here in a short paragraph, maybe 4 sentences, you've got a summary of a Marxist's understanding of the capitalist system. And what you then do in your essay, you elaborate on all of that, because already I was 4 causes, which are just pulling out of our hat. There's a lot. It really gives you a guide to the rest of your work in an essay like this. And the same with our thinking about issues. It's giving us a guide how to think about issues. Now, talking. We haven't gone talking about your videos on the 4 courses. I think one of them early said that, well, okay, I'd have to refresh my mind. I didn't take many notes as I was listening. But did you realize how much easier it was to give the 4 courses for a material thing rather than a non-material thing? And so it's easier to give a definition of a house is to give, let's say a definition of a human, or a definition of something immaterial, like what examples did we have? We had marriage, we had crime, and were really nice. Marriage, crime, racism. It's really the state, the economy. Those are some of the ones that I've looked at, and it's always easier. Love. There was one on love. It's always easier to give the 4 causes when it gets to material things. But now, why is it easier? Why is it easy to give a definition, and listen closely to what it's as if I'm using the expression definition, because best definitions are those that proceed in terms of the 4 causes. Because the 4 causes is really giving us an answer as to what is it that makes something what it is. And so that is more a definition, if you like, of definitions. So, and we'll get back to that definition, just not to confuse it too much. Why is it easier to give a 4 cause analysis of a material thing like a table, a coffee mug, a car? I mean, just to mention some of the examples I've had. Why is it easier than it is to give of something like society, society, animal, let's say even animal? Well, at least I think it is easier. Roy?
Hi.
Yes, Roy.
I'm not sure this answer will. I'm not sure this answer will totally answer it, but I think it's because of the physical aspect of such things. A shoe, a cup, it's physical, whilst society is more abstract. If you
so that's the immediate one, yes, because the very fact that it's physical makes it a lot easier. Okay, it's tangible. You can, if nothing else, you can point to it. You can point to a cup, to a table, to a chair, to a mug, in a way that you cannot point to the law, to society, to the institution, even to university. You can only point to a university building. So thank you. That is certainly one aspect. And there might be another aspect. I mean, look at the examples that we've mentioned up to now. Cup, plane, there was a plane. a cup, a plane, a car, a table. What are these things? What sort of things are those? Yes, Sean.
So
Sure.
the actual definition
Sure.
of material cause is that it's things that you can see, touch, feel, and taste. So it makes it easier on that instance that those certain things that you mentioned, like the cup, the mug, and everything else, whether it's the house or the car, it's things that you can touch, it's things that you can see. And then there's certain examples that came about from one of the people that spoke had to do with, I think it was a food element. So when it's something that you can taste, and then it then makes it easier, of course, to always define it accordingly.
Right. Okay. So he's relating it directly, in a sense, to that very definition that Aristotle is giving us about the material cause. It is material, and that's what's making it easier. Then I've had two hands up, one from TR. Okay, how does that work? So there's one in, yes.
Sorry, Jock. Yeah. I'm taking a stab in the dark, but those are all non-living things. A shoe, a table, or things like this. Things without life, as they are tangible. But Aristotle also would refer to living things rather than, can I say, tangible objects in that sense.
Right, very good. And there's a addition to that. Let's listen to Eden.
I think the reason why Aristotle speaks about living things is because his like interest in the inquiry is with regards to nature. And I think it's interesting that in the examples, there seems to be some kind of hesitation towards saying the efficient cause is God, but I think that is what he points to. And then the final cause actually is much more simple. But I think for, institutions and the things that we can't see that we used in our presentation, it's the reverse, where the efficient cause, because we're dealing with man-made structures, the efficient cause becomes easier than the final cause.
Okay, now notice that she said man-made things. Okay, like not only are these physical things, but they're also man-made things, right? Whereas, yes, I mean, living things, they're really man-made. Okay, even if you have you made it, but in a sense it's not man-made in a way. A chair, a table, a car, an aeroplane, a candle are man-made things. And so things that are man-made are, of course, always easy to define because we know why we made them, right? Okay, we know why we made them. So if we know why we made them, we know immediately what is their final cause. And so it becomes more difficult when we're looking at things that were not made by man or not by an immediately identifiable individual, because now not having made it, there's nobody there to say why he's made it, what the purpose was. Eden, your hand is still up. Do you want to add more to that?
No.
Are you welcome? Otherwise, Jacques?
Well, yeah, I was just going to say with in terms of the efficient cause, that when institutions come about, it's like collective action, and that it becomes very difficult to determine the efficient cause. Okay,
I mean, when it comes to many of the things, if we look at many of the things that are of concern to us, individuals, Eden talked about institutions. and institutions seem to exist, but very often, let us say an institute. We can ask the question, what are institutions? And that, by the way, is we don't so much ask in economics what are institutions. Rather, we try and explain economic institutions, certain institutions, why they exist. But the thing about institutions, let's say money, in a sense, it is man-made. Okay, it doesn't exist by nature, but you cannot point to one individual who made it. Yes, you can point to the efficient causes, the people who have made it. You can point to even to the Bitcoin in a way. You can point to. You can point to the metal, but it is more difficult to identify exactly why it was made. Now, but before we get that, even when it comes to material and physical things, there is one, there's one difficulty, and that's got to do with that question. I mean, all of you did, you got no problem with the efficient cause, the material cause. More difficult always are the formal causes and the final causes. Now, okay, let me ask you that question. What is a hammer? What is a hammer?
What is a hammer? So
what is a hammer?
It's a tool for knocking nails into material.
Okay, there you go. You've got two components immediately. It's a tool for driving nails into material, and it's made up of steel, and it has been put together by a blacksmith or somebody. But did you notice what she said? It is a tool. Tool is, if you like, the hammer is just a sort of tool. There are many different tools. It's a species of tools. It is a tool. And so when you're looking at the formal causes, you got to think in terms of genus and species. Are you familiar with that expression? I mean, you've done biology. You know that what is the, in biological terms, what is the human being?
Homo sapien.
The Homo sapiens. Okay, the Homo sapiens is it an insect?
It's a vertebrate.
It's a what?
A vertebrate.
Okay, there you go. Okay, it's a mammal. It's a Can you see? You're going from genus to species. You're becoming, you classifying things. It's a vertebra, and a vertebra is a mammal. Maybe I'm not really good at biology, but she's right. There you go. Okay, so so a human being is a vertebra or it's a mammal, but when you're talking about the formal causes, you've got to talk about into which genus it goes to. So when we're talking about tools, when we're talking about a hammer, it is a tool. When we are talking about what is a table? What is a table?
Piece of furniture.
It's a piece of furniture. So when you're talking about the formal cause, and a confusion, there's a bit of a confusion there. we tend to talk about the formal cause as the form or the shape that it's taken on. But that is not the way to do it. The formal cause would have to, as we've been illustrating at the moment, your table is a piece of furniture. Your hammer is a piece is a tool, and there are many types of tools, many types of furniture. So you're just looking at that particular furniture or this type of tool. And so it's even, you know, we're struggling with that word formal, and we take it, and even many of the presentations that you will see on YouTube and even written about, they will talk about formal cause in terms of the shape. But that doesn't really get to it, all right? Because we will have to think about this in terms of causation. When it comes to material things, like you know, human-made things, the questions that we are asking is who made it, what does it consist of, and what was it made for? And then it's as if we are, you know, one thing that we haven't addressed in that is we haven't addressed the question what shape it is. And so we think that is obviously, therefore, the fourth cause, you know, that's the formal cause. It's not, okay? It's related to it, but that's not what we're looking at when we're talking about the formal cause. When we talk about what is a tool? Oh, okay, so just one moment. Sorry for that. We should take a pause. You know, when you're in a classroom, at least we can take a break. Now, so these man-made things are easy to define because they're man-made. And so we can give them a name, any name, it doesn't really matter. You know, we call a hammer. We could have called it something else. We call a computer a laptop or a notebook. Doesn't really matter. Okay, they're just man-made things. And any name you give them is as good as any other name. Now with non-material things, that becomes more relevant and more difficult. And with abstract things, it becomes more difficult also and more relevant. So, I mean, there were some great examples. I'm just thinking of there was a marriage, love. I did record this somewhere. The state. Okay, these are just some of those that I've had a chance to look at. And what you got to keep in mind there, okay, so what I was saying now about the formal course must be taken over in a discussion of formal courses when we are looking at the abstract things and the natural things. A hammer is a tool, okay. A human being, what is a human being? The word that, in a sense, the word that Aristotle was using is the word, and it's been mentioned in at least 2 or 3 of the videos I've watched so far, and I'll be watching all of them. You know, I'll talk about them next week still. He used the word essence, okay, and so it's as if, you know, it's not used frequently, but one would have to look at the formal course as, in a way, getting at essence. And let's just look at, you know, I'm not going to carry on too much along this topic, because we need to look at mercantilism, and then we carry on this discussion next week. We've had, okay, if you look for instance at the example, one of the examples was marriage. That was very nice. And we want to look at this so as to talk about causation. And we'll take that up again next week. What does anybody know what an economist would say that marriage is? What would an economist say? I mean, I know specifically economists who have written about this. I mean, you know, the thing about economics, it's not difficult to figure out what they've got to say. I mean, you know, that's part of what we're doing here. We're learning the language, if you like. What would an economist say that marriage is? What is the essence of marriage? Eden?
I don't know about that, but I remember you said in one of your presentations that Becker viewed husband and wives as capital inputs in the production of new laborers.
Okay, yeah, that's right. That was Becker and them, absolutely. And Becker worked closely with somebody by the name of Richard Posner. And Richard Posner was a legal scholar, is a lawyer. He was a judge, one of the Supreme Courts in the USA, and he wrote the book called The Economic Analysis of the Law, which proved to be one of the most influential books in economics. And well, what he said about marriage is that marriage is a contract. And he says that effectively that if, you know, that's really his answer to the question, what is the formal cause of a marriage? It's a contract. And I'm raising this, and we'll work on that in the future still. I mean, what would you say about a statement, namely that marriage is at heart, in essence, as a formal cause, a contract? So what I would say is that Well, as an economist, he likes the idea of contracts because you can reduce the contract to its terms. You know, there are terms of contract that are expressed in duties and obligations. It may include price and quantities and hours. And certainly this is the sort of stuff that is making marriage, which is a bit intangible, making it more tangible, because, you know, you're pinning it down to, you've got to do A, B, C. It's specified. And of course, in economics, we've seen that starting with Hobbes, we like to reduce things that are quantifiable. We'll see that with Petty even more. And so the contract is, of course, fantastic for an economist because it is quantifiable. We can look at what is the contract? It's nothing but the terms of the contract. Okay, that's not, that's certainly the standard position taken. So Posner says marriage is just a contract. But what we got to keep in mind is the following, and we'll get back to that over the weeks again, is we can ask the question, and it's a very important question for economics. We can ask the question, is there a marriage because there's a contract? Or is there a contract because there's a marriage? What comes first? If we think about cause and effect, and Aristotle was always concerned about the question of cause and effects. And yes, as Eden was saying, if you look at these natural things, what is the cause? And he talked about the first mover, that he didn't, that the Greeks had many different deities, many gods, and they executed Socrates because Socrates didn't believe in those Greek gods. And then when Alexander the Great had died, Aristotle had to flee. Otherwise, the Athenians would have killed another philosopher. He didn't believe either in the Greek gods, but he believed in the God. He thought there has to be a God. There has to be that God because there's got to be a first mover. Every effect has a cause. But you can't carry on like this. You've got to have a first cause. And so for him, I mean, he didn't talk about the Christian God, but he would have thought there has to be something like a God that is the first mover. So just to say, he's thinking in terms of cause and effect. And let's take that and we can take that to economic thinking, economic questions at the theory level, not even at statistics, but just at the theory level. The relationship between cause and effect. Let's first look at the marriage and the contract. Is there a marriage because there's a contract, or is the contract because there's a marriage? Let's take a simpler example. Let's say you go and ask a kiddie. You ask the child, what is a dog? And what is the child likely to answer when you say, what is a dog? What is a dog? Ask your nephew or niece or a small child, what is a dog, and what answer are you going to get?
A dog is a pet.
A dog is a pet. Okay, that's great. A cat is also a pet. So you just got to give me more.
A friend?
A friend? Okay. You old schoolmate is also a friend. You're not thinking like a child, okay? So of course, you know.
If they really have a dog, would probably not refer to the dog's name or something.
You're okay.
Yes.
You can point to an individual dog and say that's a dog, okay? But if there's no dog around to point at, you know, most kids would say a dog is a pet or an animal or a friend that barks, right? Because it does bark. But we know if we look at, we can then ask the question, does it bark because it is a dog? Or is it a dog because it's barking? So we can't, yes, Roy?
I would say it barks because it is a dog.
It barks because it is a dog, okay? It barks because it's a dog. So the barking is only an effect. We couldn't use that as an example of a cause. So it cannot be any of the causes in terms of the four causes. Amanda?
So just for the marriage and the contract, wouldn't the contract come first because it is called a marriage because there's a contract? Otherwise, it's just a relationship.
Okay. Well, you see now there will now be different opinions possibly on that, but
legally.
Legally, yes, legally, okay, you're probably right, legally, but you've got many marriages where there are no contracts. I mean, in fact, in the past, there weren't ever any contracts. If you go back through history, you know, contracts, there weren't necessarily contracts for marriages, yes.
But by contract, we don't mean that technical piece of paper that we've come to understand as a contract. By contract, we mean like a voluntary agreement. And isn't it the case that if people commit to loving each other or living together or sharing property or whatever it is, that there is implicit in that a contract? That's
right. So, but you know, you that's right. There's a voluntary agreement. And because there's a voluntary agreement, we sign a contract. So the agreement comes before the contract. And so the agreement between marriage partners comes before the contract. And so the contract itself is not going to be the formal cause or the essence of the marriage. It is like, it's, if you think of it in terms of the dog and barking example, it is the voluntary agreement that comes before, and the contract is the effect of the agreement. And the contract is the effect of the marriage, because what is a marriage? You agree to marry, it's a voluntary agreement for love or for whatever reason. And then because of that, you are now willing to sign you're not going to sign the contract with X, Y, and Z. Okay, you're going to sign the contract with a person that you want to spend the rest of your life with. And so, or some part of your life at least. And so that agreement comes before the contract. And if we're defining marriage in terms of contracts, we're getting it the wrong way around. Okay, so we can't say the essence of a marriage is the contract. No, that's just the effect. Now, when we get to economics, you get a lot of that problem with, and you know, when we get to neoclassical economics, that will become very evident. We get a lot of those problems where we take something that is really the effect as the cause, and we will see that in things like rational choice theory. Even that's one our main model, our major tool of economics is the rational choice model, and we understand the rational choice model perfectly, but we find it difficult to relate it to the subject matter because it's all in the ideal. So we're back to where we started. We can distinguish between a subject matter of economics and the tools of economics. And as we are becoming more nominalist, we become stronger and stronger at studying the tools of the trade, so to say, and very often moving away from the subject matter. Economics today, the economic model, the rational choice model, is used not only to talk about economics, but about many other things. And I think I mentioned that last time. We call that what of economics? The imperialism of economics. Okay, now I'm just gonna, this is a broad discussion. We may raise some of those points again. I hope that got you thinking. I hope, when you're thinking about the causes, you can, think about the causes, the formal cause, in a slightly different manner than you've done. Put it into into the genus, if you like, and then it will also allow you to in a sense talk about things like, answer essay questions like what is mercantilism? Mercantilism is a set of theories and policies. Okay, it's a set of theories and policies. When was mercantilism present and prevalent? It's really been from the period of sort of Middle Ages until the time of Adam Smith wrote his Wealth of Nations. And when we talk about mercantilism, it's actually it's easy to understand if you keep in mind the following sort of historical contexts. At the time, if you're looking at the period, I mean, today, if you look at, let's say you look at Europe, you've got, I don't know, you've got some large countries. France, most of the people speak French, but not everybody. Spain, you got Germany, you got Italy, and these are large countries, and so you've got a limited number of states and sovereigns. And if you look at the world, the countries of the world today, there's there's maybe 210. Some of them are so small that how can you even call it a country? Like the Vatican or like San Marino. But that was not the situation 500-600 years ago. And what you very often had, not just in Europe, but also in the Asian countries, certainly also in Africa, there wasn't, I mean, well, we know less about the Americas at the time, but so you had literally hundreds and hundreds of little sovereignties and principalities. If you traveled, say, in the 1500s and 1600s, if you traveled from my hometown on the Rhine River in Switzerland, it's Basel. If you traveled from Basel to the sea in what is today Holland, say Rotterdam, you traveled on that river, and it's, I don't know how far it is, maybe 1,000 kilometers. But in those 1,000 kilometers, the tradespeople who were moving and transporting goods, they had to pay, they every time they entered a new principality or new state or a new city-state, Basel itself was a city-state. It had its own laws. It ruled itself. Many of the cities ruled themselves along the river. So along that river, you would have to pay 40, maybe even 50 times duties, levies, taxes to the principality whose water you were crossing at that point. And so if you were transporting logs from Basel that were locked and you're taking them to Rotterdam, you start off with 200 logs, and if you were to pay your duties and taxes in terms of logs, by the time you get to your destination, you're left with a dozen or so logs, wooden logs. And so the scenario that I'm drawing is that at the time there were many, many, many principalities, and each of those principalities, kingdoms, and lordships, they of course were trying to either make sure that they're not going to be taken over by a bigger kingdom, bigger principality, more powerful king, somebody with a bigger army, or if they weren't concerned about that, they would be concerned about wanting to take over their neighbor, wanting to grow their territory. And obviously they succeeded at growing their territory, and because now you've got large states. But that wasn't the case at the time when the mercantilists were writing. Well, we call them mercantilists now, but obviously they didn't call themselves mercantilists. What were they? Well, the kings, the princes, the sovereigns, they wanted to protect themselves, or they wanted to make sure they had the means to attack their neighbors. Isn't your neighbor always your biggest enemy? Because he's your biggest threat, and on the other hand, you want to take them over. So, but in order to do so, it requires wealth, because you'd have to pay an army. It requires to pay an army to defend yourself or to attack. It requires wealth. If you want to live, you want to show off that you want to attract people to your city or to your state. You want to become powerful. You need wealth for that. And who would the sovereigns, the kings, the queens even approach for advice, how to do this, what to do, how to go about it? Well, they would approach a man of substance or women of substance. And more often than not, they would therefore turn to the merchants, to the tradespeople, to those who are rich, who've become rich through banking. One of the richest families in Europe in the 1500s were the Fuchs, and they were bankers. So the kings and the sovereigns would turn to the merchants for advice on how to become rich and wealthy as a nation, as an individual king, or as a country. And the merchants, the merchant is a good person to turn to, because the merchant had become rich in his own right. So he's got the inside route. Surely he'll be able to give us advice. That was a period of transition out of feudal ages, where in the Middle Ages, plunder was the norm, and wealth was measured in terms of possession of lands, property, but in moving from the Dark Ages into the Middle Ages, into the beginnings of modernity, the beginnings of a more modern society, the merchant was able to establish himself as the successful person, the person to turn to for advice, because they would have become wealthy through their own means, intelligence, ability, and obviously lots of luck and lots of different types of plunder, if you like. But the merchant became rich, and how does the merchant measure how does he measure his wealth? How does any individual measure his wealth? Well, we can't say any, because that's really got to be qualified. How does the merchant measure his wealth?
By measuring his gold.
By measuring his golds, okay? By measuring the money that he's got. By looking at, when as individuals, we look, if you ask somebody, how rich are you, how wealthy are you, you point to something. You point to your bank account, you point to the gold, you point to your house, but effectively wealth for the merchants was gold. That was the money of the time, and well, we would say bullion more generally, gold, silver, any other metal coins. It's really before paper money or the money that we've got today. We might get a chance to talk about money later. And so the advice, obviously, when the merchants are now giving advice to the king and the sovereign, they will say, well, you got to do what it takes to get wealthy. To get wealthy is to accumulate coin, to accumulate gold. And so the advice that was given by the merchants to the sovereign was along the lines of what has to be done to get more of gold and more of silver, to get more of bullion, which is, if you want to know what is the definition of, what is these different metals, metal coins, gold money, silver money, the generic term for that is bullion, okay? So gold coins is a species of bullion. Silver coins is a species of bullion. And it became known, that advice to the king and to the lordship, that in order to become strong and powerful as a country, you got to accumulate bullion, because that's how you measure wealth. That became known as bullionism. So we've got two terms to consider in some detail in our discussion here, is mercantilism and bullionism. That bullionism is a variant or is part and parcel of mercantilism. But this idea of bullionism, that you've got to accumulate as a king, you've got to accumulate gold coins, had a tremendous implication for the policies that were implemented by the sovereigns, by the lords. So really all the policy implications and all the thinking about economic issues at the time, and that just makes me think we haven't even talked about the presentations that were uploaded on Ibn Khaldun, on Machiavelli. We'll get to that next week. But all those policies and thinking about economic issues revolved around that notion of becoming rich or through the accumulation of bullion. So let us look. If you were to give an advice to a king or a prince of your principality, trying to tell him what he's got to do to accumulate coins, what would you tell him to do? What policies would help him to accumulate more bullion?
To open up trade.
Open up trade. Okay, open up trade. Okay, now how is the king going to convert that trade into bullion, which is going to sit in the coffers in his own coffers, in the coffers of the government, in his own treasury? Tax, okay, so there will be taxation. So yes, okay, so elaborate on the trade. You want to tax the trade? You want to bring in trade to your country? What other recommendations would you make? Maybe along the lines of trade, with more detail, or other policies? Yes, Christopher?
You'll want to sell as much as you can at the highest value that you can.
Now, who's the you that you're referring to?
The state, the sovereign state, I suppose.
Okay, well, I mean, there's a possibility. How's that? You as the state yourself become involved in trades. And of course, that's what, if you now, you look, so as a state, you can engage in trade. As a king, you could engage in trades. That's one option. Now, if you are the king and you want to engage in trade, whatever the trade is, lace making or crockery making, or what would you want to do if you are now engaging in that trade?
Do you want to limit the competition?
You get rid of the competition completely, yes. I mean, you know, we talk about, in economics, we've got this fantastic model, the perfect competition model, and we always talk about competition, and we say even if there's no competition, you know, it's as if there were competition. But anybody who goes into business, the first thing they want to do is get rid of the competition, limit the competition. And if you are the sovereign, if you're the king or the prince, well, you've got the means at your disposal to limit the competition. How are you going to limit the competition?
Competitive advantage.
Well, that's, you know, that's it. That's what you got to do if you don't have much power at your disposal. Then you got to find a way to be more competitive than your competition, to have a comparative advantage, to have a better product. That's how we got to succeed. You know, if you and I were to get into business. But if you're the king,
you could create a monopoly by regulation, like they do with Eskom, for example.
Thank you very much. You get in, you regulate, you create monopolies. And so that is indeed what was done at the time of mercantilism, that the sovereign, wanting to either engage in trade himself or creating, we'll talk about monopoly in a moment, to regulate the market, regulating the market by simple means of saying nobody's allowed to produce product X except for me, the king. Okay, but now if you are the king and you're doing that, you know, you might get people might complain about you, so you might devise a different scheme. What would you do possibly in terms of regulation or the monopolies that you are creating? I mean, it's what we're doing in this country and all other countries of the world, even America. You give the monopolies to your friends and families, don't you? But so we got two things here. You're creating monopolies and you regulating. So the period of mercantilism is known a period of a high degree of regulation of the economies, a high degree of monopolies of the economies, or in the economies. Now, monopolies, of course, have various advantages for the king, because one, he can pass it on to a family member or to a friend. But even if it isn't a family member or a friend, it is easily taxable. So that's bringing us back to the first point. It's easily taxable. So if you look, for instance, in Spain in the 16th century, sheep, I mean, you know, you think about sheep and you know, every farmer in the Karoo has got sheep. So some of our neighbors have sheep. So So, and you know, they can be sold for profit. But in the 16th century Spain and 17th century Spain, there was one person who had the monopoly right to grow sheep in Spain. And for the king, that is great, because if he wants to tax the trade on sheep, he's only got to go to one person, because that's the only one person who's allowed to grow and sell sheep. And so, but of course, that one monopolist is making an enormous fortune. The whole country is impoverished, and the whole country was impoverished. But that one man was making a fortune on sheep. And the king could go to that one man and say, okay, you got to give me every year, you got to give me, we can count how many sheep you have, and you're going to pay a tax of whatever, 50% on those sheep that you've sold. And so it was easy, it was an easy way to tax the monopolists. So that's another reason, you know, compare that, you know, if there were hundreds, thousands of sheep farmers, it would be so much easier for the sheep farmer to lie about it, to hide, and so that was an efficient means. Creating monopoly rights was and here we've got like an economic analysis of the system, and we will develop that later in the course. Creating monopolies was an efficient and easy and cheap way for a king and a sovereign to collect tax. I mean, it's different today, because today we've got computerized systems, and you know, you've got big brother state. You know, there are countries in the world where every transaction has to go through electronically, and the government can basically tap into every single transaction. So today we can monitor all transactions, and the government can, even if we have thousands of traders, we can monitor that easily. But that technology wasn't available at the time of the kings of the mercantile period. So it was a period of regulation, and when later in 1776 in Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, he talks about, you know, much of his book is directed against mercantilism, because he is saying, look, you know, this is a system that's really advising that there should be monopolies, but monopolies are not really good it's good for the king, but it's not good for the Commonwealth, right? And the title of Adam Smith's book is The Wealth of Nations. He's looking at the wealth of nations, not only at the wealth of the sovereign. So we've got a lot of regulation in the mercantile period, a lot of monopolies. What other policy recommendations would you make to the king for him to advance his interest, increase his wealth?
To use cheap labor? To
use cheap labor. I mean, that was certainly, because now, I mean, let's look at this from the point of view of the merchant. Exactly. That is what the merchant would be doing. The merchant would want the cheapest labor. So his advice to the merchant is, well, let us get everybody to work. And let us get them to work as cheaply as possible. Why? What's the interest of cheap labor?
To minimize production costs.
To minimize production costs. Why are we concerned about production costs?
Because they reduce profits in the end if they're too high?
No, they would increase profits, you know, if you can produce more cheaply. Oh, sorry, you mean it the other way around. Yes, for profit's sake, okay, we want cheap labor for profit's sake. What more? Think of it now, moving from the position of the merchant to the position of the king or the sovereign. If you're able to produce more cheaply than your competition, you've got what was mentioned earlier, you've got a competitive advantage. Okay, now how is that competitive advantage going to be used? Let's step back just a little bit again. We are saying that in that period that the merchant is giving advice in hoping that through this advice there will be more currency in the country, and more currency that eventually can find its way to the king or to the sovereign. So what are you going to do to get more currency into the country?
Increase your exports.
Increase exports. All right, and that's why we want to have cheap labor, because if our labor is cheap, we become more competitive. Our products will be cheaper than the neighbors that we worried about, and so instead of only consuming what's produced locally, you start exporting it. What happens when you export? Okay, I mean, it's all of us, but especially the economists, when you're exporting, what happens to the flow of money? What is the flow of money? What direction?
When you export, you get an inflow of money, and for the mercantilists it would be gold, and to keep their trade balance positive.
That's right. When you export, there's an inflow of money. The trade flow is positive. There's an accumulation of bullion. You know, if you're exporting, let us say you are manufacturing what is fashionable today. Let's say you've got a very beautiful face mask and you're exporting it to America. Well, the American client of yours, the American client of you wants to buy your face masks here, but he's got to pay you, you know, you got to get your money in South Africa. So he's got to pay your money in rand. And so he's using American dollars, putting it into a South African bank, which then pays out to you for the face masks in South African rand. And you've got a flow of money into South Africa. So an export is a flow into money into your country. And so as he's saying, that positive balance is an inflow of bullion. And isn't that what the merchant is advising him to do? Export more and you get more bullion coming to the country. What other advice is he going to give him?
He would advise him to charge high tariffs on imports.
Okay, that's right, which was being done all the time, as in the example of even it's only passing through, as in the example of the logs that going down the River Rhine, as any product that comes into the country, tax. That's part of the regulation. I mean, it's the total opposite. Today, we're talking about the global economy. We've got the World Trade Organization. Our tax rate, you can hardly raise any taxes on any imports because it's against the World Trade Organization rules and laws. The moment you subscribe to that, there's a tax regime which limits what products you can tax and how much you can tax it. But at the time, it's a free for all. It's your sovereign, it's you the sovereign. You can do as you please. You can tax anyway. Why do we, in today's terms, in today's world, why do we insist on having low import taxes? Well, when we get to Ricardo, we're going to get to the theory of comparative advantage. We're going to get to international trade. But at the heart of it is the notion that we all benefit from trade. There's benefit from trade. If there's trade, there's room for specialization. You extend the size of your market. Adam Smith said that the degree of specialization depends on the size of the market. And the more specialized you are, the more efficient you are. So the more specialization there is, the bigger the market is, the more you can specialize, the more efficient you can be, and so forth. and therefore we would show the more will be the greater will be the number of goods that can be traded, and we're all better off. That's the modern free trade arguments. And of course, at the time, the policy recommendations were the opposite. Raise taxes. If you're the king and you want to get wealthy, or you want to have more money in the country, well, raise taxes. It's going to fill your pockets. And so again, we can see the regulation at place. What other policy recommendations would you give? Other policies to bring in the card related to what you've set up to now. What is the opposite of exports?
Imports.
Imports, right? And what would you, if you're now giving advice to the king, and you're telling him, okay, what should be done so that more money flows into the country? What would you want to achieve with regards to imports?
You'd want to limit the amount of imports coming into the country.
Correct. You limit the amount of imports. And that's one reason why you've got the taxes, to limit them, to make the products more expensive. But if they do come in, you're getting the money on it. But you're limiting the amount of imports. Because what happens to your bullion when you import?
It flows out of the country.
Thank you. It flows out. The opposite of what you want to achieve. So, related to the policy recommendation of export, cheap labor in order to export, you also want to limit imports. Again, it's contrary to what we are saying today. Now, the consensus is that, well, people are saying that the mercantilist period, in terms of theory, it was a bit of a failure because it's making all of those recommendations, which today would be taboo, or, well, officially at least, limiting imports, encouraging exports. But of course, when we talk about neo-mercantilism, and we'll get back to that in a moment, we still implement those policies, don't we? But let's still stick to some of the policy recommendations, in addition to limiting imports, creating exports, imposing tariffs, duties, levies, taxes. What else? Creating monopolies, okay? Regulating the economy. What are other possible avenues for the king to increase his wealth? Or for the country to have a flow of bullion into the country?
To add as much value as possible to raw materials to then export them.
Correct. That's like getting involved in the production, beneficiation. Some raw materials you may not have, or that was certainly one of the key aspects that you want to add value to your material, so that, look at it in the context of South Africa. I lived in Kimberley for some years, and there was always this thing going on about beneficiation of what? Of diamonds. Because the diamonds were dug out in Kimberley, but then they were sent as raw diamonds to Rotterdam and Amsterdam. And so a focus has been, not very successful, has been to have more beneficiation, a cutting of the stone, so that the currency would stay in the country. So that was a policy that was policy recommendation by the merchant. And of course, the merchant would want to be part of that beneficiation. He would start the production so that he would be part of the wealth that would come from that. So that's an additional policy recommendation. What else? You wouldn't believe it, but there's still some big ones that we're missing out on. especially with what Christopher was saying now, beneficiation, raw materials. What about raw materials? If you don't have the raw materials, what you do?
I'm not sure this actually makes sense, but what about the import of raw materials from colonies such as India and African colonies, so that a finished product could be sold back to them for a higher price?
Did you hear that? And he's asking, he doesn't know if that makes sense. That makes perfect sense. If you don't have the raw materials, you got to either import it from your neighbor, but then you give the money to him. So what do? You have your colonies. Or you have, let's say you don't have the colonies, you've got to, let's say your neighbor's got a colony and you need the raw material from that colony, but you're really giving the money to your neighbor, if you like. So that whole period of colonization is related to mercantilism, because that is the way. If you don't have the raw materials, you can access the raw materials if you simply colonize an area. He was mentioning India. Okay, India was the colony of who?
Britain.
Britain,
Yeah.
that's right. South Africa was the colony of who?
The Dutch, and then later Britain.
Now listen to this, the Dutch. Before the Dutch were the owners of the colony, who was it?
The Portuguese, I think.
No, they discovered it, but they didn't really colonize it. But it was the Dutch East India Company, right? So the Dutch East India Company was what? It was a monopoly. The British East India Company was what? It was a monopoly. The British East India Company was the only company that had the charter from the King of England to trade in India and other parts of Asia. And the same with many, all of those trading companies were monopolies. But they were monopolies not only because it, so it gave a monopoly, right? So there's regulation. You cut out all the competition. You don't even allow competition from fellow citizens. You certainly don't allow competition from other countries. That's why you're colonizing it. You now control the minerals. Why did England all of a sudden get so interested in South Africa around the time of the Boer War? Because of the gold they found in Gauteng, Egoli. What did the Spaniards do when they went to Latin America? What were they interested in? They were interested in the gold. Because that is right there for bullion theory, okay? If you want to have more bullion, well, why don't you go right to the source of bullion? And that's, you go and dig out the gold, or you get the gold, you steal the gold from the Aztecs, from the colonies in South America, or you create monopolies so that you're the only one who can trade in tea. Do you know where the tea plant is from? The tea tree. It's a tree, isn't it? I suppose so. Yeah. What is the original place of tea?
Isn't it India?
It's not even India, and that's the amazing thing.
Asia?
It's in Asia. Which country in Asia?
China.
China.
There you go. China. You know, Chinese tea. And the Chinese, I mean, their thinking was as mercantilistic as the European thinking. The Chinese, you know, what the meaning of China, the word China means central power. Okay, they saw themselves not as the central power of China, of Asia. They saw themselves as the central power of the world. And if you look at China, even at that time and long before that, they were way advanced, more advanced than the Europeans. They had a postal system since before the birth of Christ, since BC. They had fireworks, and the fireworks eventually came to Europe. That's how eventually guns got developed. And so they always saw themselves as the central power. And as the central power, their pride was, you know, there's nothing that we cannot do. We cannot benefit from the trade. I mean, how can we benefit from the trade with those lowly Europeans who are so technologically backwards? And so the Chinese didn't want to trade with the Europeans. They had no interests. And yet the Europeans couldn't easily colonize China. And so the Europeans, the English, the Germans, the French, if they wanted to trade, the only thing that the Chinese were willing to accept from the Europeans was what? I mean, they didn't want to buy European trinkets. They couldn't offer them anything. I mean, you know, what could the Europeans do better than the Chinese? According to the Chinese, nothing. So what is the only thing that the Chinese were willing to accept from the Europeans? If you don't want to take their goods, you're willing to take the
gold.
Thank you. You're willing to take the gold. So trade with China was a terrible thing for the Europeans because it meant an outflow of gold. The gold was going the wrong way. It was going to China. And so, I mean, you know, in one of the readings we've got Mann. Anyway, he talks about this. But what the Europeans couldn't colonize effectively. They tried, you know, but they really couldn't colonize China. But Chinese trade was important then as it is now. At the time, China provided things that no other country could supply. Tea, one of them, because there was no tea in India, and silk. Yes, Chuck. Okay, I thought there was a hand up. And so you know what? So there was at least for the British East India Company and all of those monopolies, and for the European states, bullion was going the wrong way. Bullion was flowing out of the country to China rather than back. And so, do you know what the Chinese? Anybody got an idea what the English did in order to deal with that problem of the Chinese trade at the time of mercantilism?
Opium.
Again? Thank you. Opium. That's right. Opium. Tell us more. What you know about it?
They started trading opium, which they were getting from colonies in Afghanistan and that area. But it was quite soon outlawed in China. And they fought a whole war, and that's how they got control of Hong Kong.
Okay. So can you see? Afghanistan or these parts of India is now a colony of England. They're now taking the opium from there and they're taking it to China to make the Chinese addicted to the opium. And once you're addicted to the opium, well, your guards are down. Now you want that opium and you're willing to trade anything for that opium. And so that's what happened. And that's how, well, that's part of the ploy also for the British to smuggle out, because the Chinese didn't allow any tea plants to leave China. and I'm not sure if it was involved with the opium trade, but the opium trade opened up China for actual trading, because the British would sell them opium, no longer bullion, opium, and they would be able to get the Chinese goods for that. One of the goods that came out of China in that way, I think, was the tea tree, that was then taken by the British and planted in England and Sri Lanka. And from now on, they didn't have to go to China to get the tea. And don't the English like tea very much? So do most of us. We like tea. And so now they could source it, not from England, but from the colonies. So you can see how these policies, those policies that are what we would call mercantilistic policies, they're all related one way or another to this notion of having, the king becoming rich and nation becoming rich as measured by the amount of bullion in the country. And when Adam Smith comes along, he throws it out the window and says, certainly our thinking isn't like this. Just having bullion doesn't necessarily make you rich. What happened in Spain, for instance? Spain was importing all that gold from Latin America, from South America, Bolivia, Peru, and Mexico. El Dorado was supposedly somewhere there. Ships sank full of gold. And so the amount of gold that they brought to Spain was so much that the value of the currency the value of gold itself diminished. And the inflation rate, and we'll look at that when we do the theory of money, what's it called again? The quantity theory of money. The more money you have, the less its value. And so the more gold they had, the less the value of gold, and the less gold could buy. And so there was a rapid inflation, what is called rapid inflation at the time, not like here now, but they had like a doubling of prices in the period of 100 years because of the golds. And well, what we'll see, it ruined Spain rather than made Spain rich. So again, we see that concern with bullion really affecting the policies and the theoretical proposals put forward at the time of mercantilists. Do you get an idea how these policies are related to sort of the mercantilist tradition, where the merchant is giving advice of what to do? I'm sure we could think of many other examples of many other policies that could be implemented on the advice of the merchant to advise the king, to enrich the king. But it's all hanging together. Once you know the situation of the European writers that were the mercantilist tradition, and how you see the context, the historical context, the policies that were prescribing are easy to understand. They just fall in line. Okay, they are in a sense so many of the policies that we would still implement today if you look at your country as the only one that you have to be concerned about, because the thinking was a zero-sum game thinking, that whatever money because if money is measured, wealth is measured in gold, and apart from the inflow of gold from South America, the amount of gold in the world was pretty much fixed. It grows very slowly. So whatever gold you don't have, somebody else has. And so you want to get more gold, but getting more gold, becoming richer, meant you need to impoverish your neighbor. And so it also affected the politics, the mindset of the time. That you didn't just want to enrich yourself, but you also wanted to impoverish your neighbor if you possibly could. And so they had proper trade wars. Let's briefly look at England. Sorry, at America. Was America a British colony? Yes or no?
Some of it was French.
Well, very good answer. Thank you very much. Yes, it was, but not all of America as we know today. Yes, portions of it. It was a colony until independence. Independence was when?
1776.
Yeah, I think 77, somewhere like that. Now, what did England do? What did England do as the colonial power? Well, it would do whatever advice would be the reasonable advice, namely that the American colonials, those living in America, that were now producing cotton, that were producing other manufactured goods, that they wouldn't be allowed to send it to anybody else but England. Those were what's called the Navigation Acts or the Navigation Laws. The American colony wasn't allowed to trade with anybody just willy-nilly. No, all of their goods had to be sold to the colonial power England. And likewise, the Americans couldn't just get what it needed from any other nation. They had to get it from England. So they couldn't import tea directly from India by then. They had to import tea via America. They couldn't trade on manufactured goods with the French or Germany. It had to be done via the English colonial power. And that, of course, led to a revolt by the colonials, and therefore the War of Independence. So there is another example of policy making as regards the mercantile period. Now let's just take all of that and bring it to the present. And where do you see neo-mercantile or neo-mercantilistic policies, or what would they be? If at all they are.
This is more of a question. Would you say that Donald Trump's policies are neo-mercantile?
Donald Trump's policies are clearly neo-mercantile. Yes, I would say so. I mean, here's an example. When even before he got into power, he was talking, let's bring jobs back to America. Okay, let's get the American people employed. That's like at the mercantile period, that's one of the policy recommendations of the mercantile period, the mercantilist period, is that employ as many people as possible, because the more people you employ, the more people have jobs. The more people have jobs, the more is being produced, the more can be exported, the richer the nation is. And that's also what's behind, and I'm not saying it's unreasonable, that's what's behind the policies of Trump. It's neo-mercantile. Let us produce locally rather than import from China. They've opened some 5 years ago, I think, or less than that. They opened the first new television manufacturing plant in America. I mean, all of every single television manufacturing plant in America closed down in the period 1980, 1990s. It's just being imported. But they opened one, not because they're necessarily more efficient, but a lot of money's been put into it. And certainly in terms of neo-mercantilist policies, the same with the car industry. Let's not import cars from Japan. Let the Japanese manufacture their cars in Japan. Let the Germans manufacture let the Japanese manufacture the cars in America. If they want us to have their cars, let them be produced in America. Other examples, I mean, there's plenty of examples, but what are other examples, not just in America? But if you want to sell to the American army, the American army will only acquire American products unless they are products it cannot get from America. Then it can import it. Otherwise, it's forced to only acquire locally manufactured products. Of course, it's got strategic military reasons, but it's also got mercantilistic, neo-mercantilistic slants to it. What are other examples of neo-mercantilistic thinking and policies in the world, in South Africa? I mean, you look at the trade wars between China and America, they are about, they have, Trump wants to limit, he's put a ceiling on the value of imports from America, right? It's not so much because, it's got something specifically against the Chinese, but it's because he thinks that's what's required to make America economically more successful. And what do the Chinese do? Well, Trump would, of course, say that they are engaging in that industrial espionage. Why do espionage, that's really part of warfare, isn't it? They want to acquire knowledge about the opposition, and that allows, so they're also looking at this from a neo-mercantilistic position, trying to be able to produce more products, trying to become more powerful as a nation. And these are neo-mercantilist policies. If you look at where's all, let's say America is in a recession, as it was in 2008. It printed billions, no, not billions, $2 trillion effectively, I think, if I recall correctly. Where is that money sitting? I mean, whatever money is being printed in America, even today still, even if you were to print more money in South Africa, you print more money, people buy more goods. But in order to buy more goods, what are we likely to do? If we would give everybody let's say R1 million, what would everybody want to do? Buy a fancy watch or shoes or what? Where do we get it from?
From China?
From China. We import it from China, much of it, exactly. Same with America. You print money there, and the Americans are now going on a spending spree. They're all importing Chinese goods. So that's why China is the perfect example of mercantilistic success. Its reserves in currency, in bullion, in gold, in American dollars are vast. I mean, some of you, if you're interested, you should go and do the research and check the numbers and report back to us. That's why the Chinese, if they could, they would acquire and buy all the American companies because they've got all the currency. What are they going to do with the currency? And so it's neo-mercantilist also because they're not allowing their currency to fluctuate and devalue, okay? Because we think that is what ought to happen. No, they don't want the currency to appreciate in value. So they're keeping their currency artificially through so there's a regulation, which is the cornerstone of mercantilism. They're keeping it artificially low so that they remain competitive, so that they can continue be the workshop of the world. And the currency, and the Americans are quite happy to print the money because it's being stored in a Japanese treasury. They can't just flood the market with that money because they would lose their own wealth. And so we've got like a neo-mercantilist system in place between China and America, and certainly the Chinese are having lots of currency there. Okay, Eden, yes.
Would we consider the Asian tigers and their economic growth in the 70s to be neo-mercantilism because they were limiting imports and trying to maximize exports and did so successfully?
So I mean, this is that is certainly the case. We talk in economics. We've got the expression of the infant industry argument, which goes back to Friedrich List. He was considered one of the German historical school, a predecessor, and the German historical school thought very highly of the mercantilistic system and the mercantilistic policies because they saw it as nation building. And so the German historical school at the time of Marx had a positive view of mercantilism because they saw it as a form of nation building, and because List's argument was that you want to grow your own industries. They are inefficient at the beginning, but you give them protection. You safeguard them from competition, and they will grow and then eventually become efficient. And look at how efficient they've become in those Asian tigers, Korea. I know I was in a medical devices industry. There were certain products, input products, synthetic absorbable suturing material you couldn't get anywhere else, either from the one American producer who had a monopoly right on it, or from the Koreans, only nation that was able to produce that. And so yes, these are examples of neo-mercantilistic policies. Thank you very much. Other examples you can think of? Do we have it in South Africa?
State monopoly?
Yes, well, yeah. I guess, our state monopolies. Is South African Airways still around? It's not even a monopoly, but the logic of the state monopolies isn't so much related to neo-mercantilism as it is related to the economies of scale argument of monopolies. So the argument there, that's if when we always eulogize perfect competition, but we make exception when you say that you need to have a large monopolist to get the economies of scale. And so we justify that not so much in terms of mercantilism, but we justify it in terms of economies of scale. And that's why we had Telkom. But much of that rationale has flown by the wayside. But can you think of other examples possibly related to neo-mercantilism? Yes, there's a hand up there. OS or MM? Roy.
Tariffs on imports?
Tariffs, yeah, okay. We would, and there are still some tariffs on import, but we limit it because we are part of the World Trade Organization. And so we cannot simply tariff anything and as much as we want to. But there are certainly some countries who are not part of who haven't signed up to the World Trade Organization, and they haven't done so that they can impose their own tariffs and pursue their own mercantilistic policies, neo-mercantilist policies. So, Roy.
I would say cheap labor are mostly in the mining sector to reduce production price.
And you can, yes, and you can see that more brutally even in when it comes to child labor. But often this cheap labor isn't so much necessarily motivated. It's there, but it's not motivated because somebody wants to implement mercantilistic policies, but it's there because simply the owner, the capitalist, the entrepreneur, the manager wants to for his own sake pay the lowest amount for labor. So he's not giving advice to the king saying, or to the Bangladeshi government or the South African government that you should minimize, you should pay the lowest possible wages so that you're most efficient and you can export more. But if that were the policy recommendation, yes, it would be neo-mercantilist. But if it is simply a matter of simply pursuing profits, do not, necessarily identify that with neo-mercantilist policies. That is often just greed, isn't it? But it's not an official policy.
I mean, De Beers is an interesting monopoly related to South Africa, because we certainly don't break it up, and if we did, we'd lose most of the export value of diamonds, because it's only through monopoly that it maintains any value.
Well, that's a beautiful example, okay? Because, I mean, I saw it especially in Kimberley, you arrive in Kimberley, and just because you're in Kimberley, everybody thinks, and you come from Joburg, you think you're there to work for De Beers. Do you know that until the 1950s, Kimberley accounted, I read it at the time when I was there, I read it in the newspaper, when they say what was 50 years ago, this was written in a newspaper. I read there that in the 1950s, Kimberley accounted for half of the government revenue of South Africa. And that Kimberley, the city, okay, but obviously mostly it is just the diamonds which were traded through Kimberley, where they've got the sightings. If you were anywhere in the world, if you wanted diamonds, you had to buy, and still today you have to buy from De Beers, and you had to come to Kimberley or London for the sighting. But eventually, the diamonds would leave from Kimberley, and the revenue would find its way back to Kimberley. And yes, and of course, the government allowed that to happen because it was not a state monopoly, but it was creating a monopoly which the state was able to tax very successfully. Because De Beers, the way that De Beers operates, still does, not as efficiently, but I still account for, what is it, Jesri, about 60% of all diamond transactions in the world. You could effectively only sell if you are a diamond sharpener, if you want the diamonds, you had to go to the sightings of De Beers. If you didn't take those diamonds that were offered, you couldn't go there again. And De Beers locked down all the markets in the world, not just South Africa. They also had agreements with Russia. They financed the Russian, in the 1980s and 1990s, they financed the Russian diamond industry, which was starting. But in this agreement with Russia, Russia agreed to sell all its diamond to De Beers. And in return for that, De Beers gave them knowledge and capital to build the mining industry. The same in other parts, the same in Namibia, the same in Zimbabwe. Well, Zimbabwe, I don't know what's the story now. Of course, you've got blood diamonds, but yes, that's an example. The government allowing that monopoly to exist, not breaking it up and taxing it heavily. So heavily that Kimberley accounted for 50% of tax revenue in South Africa. Thank you for that example. Yes. Who do we have the hands up? Christopher, FM.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yes, I wanted to ask with regards to neo-mercantilism, would we classify soft power as a form of neo-mercantilism?
Okay, so before I answer that, I would want you to elaborate on the meaning of the term soft power so that there's no ambiguity.
Sorry?
Soft power. What would you call soft power?
I would define soft power as a persuasive approach exerted by one state on another, or the ability of a state to make another state do what it would not naturally do. Yeah.
Okay, absolutely. I mean, just give me some examples of that, because soft power, yes, that is now the relationship between states. I can't think of an example offhand, I would have to think a bit longer, but maybe you can give us an example, because that would be neo-mercantilist. You are using your power to induce smaller countries. I suppose we're mostly talking about more powerful nations, leaning on other nations, telling them, don't export there, only sell to us. That would be an example of neo-mercantilist policies. Yeah, absolutely. As long as it is for the benefit of that one that's employing the persuasive power. So neo-mercantilist policies play a very important role in international relations. Even in Germany, you could even look at Germany, and it's in the European Union. And I read, that was a very good essay, one of the students last year. In those essays that you write, 400 words, and that student said, Germany has, even though they're part of the European Union, which is open economy, free market, at least within the Union, Germany kept its salaries, and that relates back to other points raised earlier about when Tumelo, I think, was talking about the low salaries in the mining industry. That's what Germany pursued and still pursues today, keeping salaries very low. The minimum wage in Germany is about 400 euro. I mean, you can't live in Germany on that sort of money, but that's the minimum wage. And they're doing everything they can to keep salaries low in Germany. And so it is extremely competitive. Nobody, people can't turn around and say, you are basically defeating the purpose of the European Union, because they permit trade. There's free flow of goods, free flow of money. But in the meantime, they pursue neo-mercantilist policies by keeping salaries low and becoming very efficient and very productive. And that's why you've got Germany grow, while the rest of Europe, like Greece, like Portugal, like Italy, is getting progressively impoverished. More and more of the productive capabilities and production is moving away from Greece and Italy, even France and England, towards Germany, because Germany is just producing it more efficiently at lower prices, given the relatively low and artificially low, some would say, salaries. So there's another example of neo-mercantilist policies. How did we talk about that? That's because of the soft power is it's obviously not related to this one, but these are all examples. When I point like this, it just so happens that Fortunate's square is on that side of the screen. Other
Can
examples?
I just ask a question?
Yes.
I just wanted to, this is unrelated. I just need to know what time class is ending. It is 8 o'clock now, and
I'm very sorry. I think class should have ended long ago. Okay. Class should have ended long ago.
Okay. What is the official end time? Is it 7:30? I know today we started 30 minutes late.
Okay, I mean, that's a difficult one, because officially with my economics students, I should be having 2 hours, I think.
Yes.
And with my development studies students, I should be having 2.5 hours or 45 minutes more. And so, so there's no clear answer to that. But in principle, I will not do this again, okay?
All right.
I'll stick to the hours, because you're a captive audience. I don't even have to go home. I'm already at home, so I can stay and we can carry on like this for a long time.
I think that's the challenge. We're just having funny eyes looking at us because it's also dinner time. So I'm just not sure if I leave now, I'm losing out, or
So, so you're all welcome to leave. I just carried on. I was aware of the problem. I carried on because I thought, okay, it's relating to your essay topic. So let me carry on a bit longer. That was my thinking in my defense. But I should have stopped a long time ago. If you have any questions on mercantilism, neo-mercantilism, then you will. I don't want to have because it's a essay topic for everybody. I don't want to take private conversations on that, but whatever questions you have, put it on the group WhatsApp for the history of economic thought, and then I'm happy to answer there, and we'll conclude our lecture now if that's all right with you. I'm sure it is.
So I just have a question. Is this lecture being recorded and is it going to be uploaded as well on Sakai?
It is recorded. I see it's being recorded. So it will be uploaded on Sakai. If that's what you want.
Big. I think these files are too big for Sakai, but they get saved inside of Teams.
Sorry?
Eden, I didn't hear you.
Eden?
Sorry, I was saying, I think that these last semester we had a problem. Maybe I'm mistaken, but it seems that these files were too big to upload to Sakai, but they do save automatically inside Microsoft Teams, inside the course page.
I have actually not seen them, but if someone knows how to retrieve them, it would really be helpful. Please.
Okay, let me do this because I was able to retrieve I like that word. I was able to get downloads last week's lecture. But what I will do, given that there might be those constraints on Sakai, what if I put them onto our WITS-Het YouTube channel?
Yep, that's good.
Okay, and we'll do the same with this lecture.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Good luck. All your work.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thanks for all attending.